Welcome to the Hunchcast, where we discuss all things the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I'm Leslie.
And I'm Patrick. And today we're discussing books 10 and 11, the final books of Victor Hugo's Notre-Dame de Paris.
Yes, we have reached the end of our hunchtacular journey into Victor Hugo's classic novel. But before we jump into book 10, it's time for our minute of history. We've talked extensively about the novel's initial reception. We have talked about the motivating factors that pushed Victor Hugo to write the novel, namely his sorrow at witnessing the decay and neglect of Notre Dame Cathedral by Enlightenment thinkers who just did not believe that quote-unquote old buildings needed to be preserved the way Hugo and his circle of young romantics did. Clearly, Victor Hugo rallying people through the novel Notre-Dame de Paris to preserve and care about Notre-Dame de Paris. Clearly that worked, right? Because the cathedral is still here, it's still standing. It was even restored again a couple years ago as the result of that infamous 2019 fire. I would like to know a little bit more about what that revival of public interest looked like and what the restoration process looked like.
Well, only a few years after the novel was published, you have royalty coming up to Victor Hugo at dinner parties, calling Notre-Dame de Paris Victor Hugo's cathedral. So man and book and building are united pretty shortly. And during Hugo's lifetime, the cathedral is restored. It was in a terrible state, obviously, as this novel talks about. It was falling apart. The statues had many of their heads cut off. And during the French Revolution, it was used as a grain silo and a temple for an atheist religion. But the popularity of the novel, as well as 19th century medievalism in general, really made people turn their heads and take a look at this cathedral. This is our national heritage. This is our religious heritage, political heritage. 1,000 years of history shouldn't just be left to rot and be thrown away.
This is Quasimodo's house. We need to take care of it for him.
There are some minor restorations that occur right before the novel is published, but it's really after the novel gets published and it becomes a popular novel and an early classic that the restoration gets underway. So, in the 1840s, a notable young architect named Viollet-le-Duc, as well as a few other people, begin restoring Notre Dame. And the restoration arguably is more of a reflection of how Victor Hugo describes the cathedral in the book versus what the cathedral actually looked like in its prime. Some historical features were restored, but a lot of them were really based on what Le Duc and other architects assumed that the medieval sculptors would have done if they had the budget and if they had the means to do things like add bronze statues of the apostles, add a physics-defying giant spire on top of the cathedral, and especially adding many extra grotesque statues of monsters and demons, which Hugo talks about throughout the book.
So those, what people call gargoyles, those big stone monsters you see in pictures all the time, those weren't there originally? Victor Hugo made those up?
Not outright made them up, but there were far less of them, and they were a lot smaller. The large statues that are almost human-sized that you see leaning over balconies, those were almost entirely built in the 19th century. They almost look like little Quasimodos leaning over the balustrade. Hugo himself did comment on the restoration of Notre Dame. At one point when passing by the restored Notre Dame, he made a comment along the lines of, it is very fine. So I guess he was happy. And while at the time, a lot of the 19th century restoration of Notre Dame was controversial, time has proven that the changes in the 19th century are what people want to see. So tourists and Parisians alike enjoy seeing these chimeras. They enjoy seeing the big metal spire, especially because nearly a decade ago there was a terrible fire in Notre Dame and that spire collapsed and broke through the ceiling, and people were very upset about it. Ultimately, it is very possible that without Notre-Dame de Paris, we would not have the masterpiece in stone and the UNESCO World Heritage Site that we have now.
So essentially, Victor Hugo won the war on the demolishers, and the restorers looked at his novel and said, okay, we're gonna give the people what they want.
It's gonna be more medieval than the Middle Ages. It's the George Lucas special edition of architectural restoration.
Let me put CGI in this movie from 1977. Ooh.
Let me put this big leaden spire where there wasn't any plan for one before. Or if there was, it was very small.
Are you saying the leaden spire is the Jabba the Hut of Notre-Dame de Paris?
I think the CGI Jabba the Hut equivalent is found in the series of statues based on the 12 apostles. One of them is modeled after Le Duc himself.
You know what? I don't blame him. If I was responsible for restoring this building that I knew would be standing for the rest of time, I'd put myself in it too. I'd draw a little smiley face somewhere, say Leslie was here with a Z. It would be great. Well, thank you so much for that history lesson, Patrick. Let's jump into the book. Book 10, Chapter 1 begins from the perspective of a character who, frankly, I keep forgetting is in this novel, because I don't think he wants to be in this novel. Pierre Gringoire runs into Claude Frollo one day. He notices that Frollo, his former mentor, is greatly changed, pale as a winter morning, his eyes sunken, his hair almost white. So Claude Frollo has almost completed his transformation into the statue that he aspires to be.
And Claude Frollo is on a mission. He is telling Gringoire some terrible news. Esmeralda has been ordered to be hanged, even though the law of sanctuary is in place, because there's an exception to the law. If the French Parliament, which apparently exists in 1482, writes a special order, sanctuary can be violated, and Esmeralda is to be hanged in 3 days' time. Now, this is a lie.
Of course it is.
Claude Frollo just wants to get Esmeralda away from Quasimodo, and he knows he's too weak to deal with both of them. Now, Gringoire has no way to verify this information, not just because there's no AP news bulletin saying King Louis XI and the French Parliament decided to violate the law of sanctuary for one random Romani girl living in Notre Dame. He also doesn't care. He barely notices that his wife is around. He kind of forgets that he has a wife.
I think he forgets that he's in this book. He keeps leaving and randomly running into the characters. Oh, hey, it's you. Oh, I forgot about you. How are you?
And while Claude Frollo is telling Gringoire this BS lie, Gringoire, being our ADHD king, is talking about his new hyperfixation. He went from being interested in women to being interested in animals. Now he says he's interested in stones and architecture, which he considers far less treacherous than both animals and women.
Hey, teacher, want to see my pet rock? Look, it's so cool. I put little googly eyes on it. Isn't it awesome? Aren't you proud of me?
He is insistent that Gringoire repay Esmeralda for saving his life by participating in a scheme to save her life.
Even though her life is not in danger and this is just a lie. Oop!
The idea is that Gringoire will enter Notre Dame, swap clothes with Esmeralda, and then Esmeralda will escape disguised as a man, and then Gringoire will be wearing a dress.
Progressive.
But Gringoire's not so into it. He realizes, wait a minute, once the Order of Parliament comes up, I'm gonna be hanged. Claude Frollo doesn't mind, he's cool as a cucumber. You will be hanged, perhaps, he says, but she will escape. This is yet another inside joke by Hugo.
Oh, do tell.
Just like when Captain Phoebus was mentioning all of the original names for Quasimodo, like Mardi Gras, so too is this plan taken from Hugo's original outline and notes. This was supposed to happen, and Gringoire was going to die heroically, which, spoiler alert, is not going to happen. So this is yet another inside reference that only Hugo would have known as to how the plot was supposed to go.
Yeah, some adaptations of this novel portray Gringoire as the type of hero who would die heroically in his wife's place. This incarnation of the character is not that. He has no interest in a plan that requires him to be hurt whatsoever. And Claude Frollo says, well, come on, she saved your life. You're only paying a debt. She married you to save you from hanging. Now you can be hanged to repay that debt. And Gringoire says, I have plenty of other debts I don't pay. Which is a great callback to Book 2, where Victor Hugo writes that Pierre Gringoire is about 6 months behind on his rent, and because of that, he can't go back to his apartment and sleep in a real bed. So Pierre Gringoire counters Claude Frollo's plan with an escape plan of his own. He says, all right, look, I have a way to make us both happy. We're going to save Esmeralda, and I'm going to save my skin. I'm going to tell the vagabonds of the Court of Miracles about this edict from Parliament, which, again, is a lie. And because the vagabonds love Esmeralda so much, she is their princess, they're going to launch a siege on Notre Dame. They're going to remove her from the cathedral before the king's archers can, and they will bring her safely back to the court. And Claude Frollo goes, okay, fine, whatever, we can do that. Of course, Esmeralda, in Claude Frollo's mind, will never get safely back to the court because he has a trick up his sleeve.
So Gringoire leaves to go start a riot, and Claude Frollo is wandering about thinking of his evil plan. However, he gets interrupted again. And speaking of debts that don't get paid, Jehan visits Claude Frollo again and asks him for money. Now at this point, Claude is at the bottom of the pit of despair, completely mad, almost turning into a statue. Claude Frollo couldn't be less interested in giving beer money to his little brother, or even lecturing him that much. And Jehan whines and pouts. He says, why, if you don't give me money, I'll become a vagabond, I'll become a tramp, I'll join the Court of Miracles. Claude Frollo calls him out on his bluff. He says, okay, this is the last money you will ever get from me. And he throws Jehan one of his little coin purses that he just has so many of as a priest who has taken a vow of poverty. Jehan seems pretty satisfied by this. He takes the money and he decides, oh, you know what? I will become a vagabond. And he leaves for the Court of Miracles as well.
So Chapter 3 opens on said Court of Miracles. The beggars and tramps and vagabonds and whatever you want to call them, they are preparing to storm Notre Dame. And they are armed to the teeth. They are sharpening miscellaneous weapons, daggers, swords, hatchets, spearheads, saws, crossbows. They are going to rescue Esmeralda, and heaven help whoever gets in their way.
And Jehan is fitting right in already. He's gotten a full suit of armor, somehow.
Imagine you decide to join the Court of Miracles, and the very first night that you get there, everyone's preparing to go into battle. You know, you walk in, you're like, hey, how do I become a tramp? And they go, yeah, we're gonna skip the part where we try to hang you, and we're gonna skip the part where we make you, like, pickpocket somebody, blah, blah, blah. We have a battle to fight. Can you hold a sword? Yeah? Okay, you're in. Let's go.
So Jehan's got this suit of armor, and he's making this big speech about how he's given up all of these worldly pleasures to become a vagabond, and he just keeps going on and on while carousing with ladies and asking for more wine.
So he says he's given up earthly pleasures, but he literally has a woman sitting in his lap, and he's drunk out of his mind. Okay. What worldly pleasures are you talking about, my friend?
I was rich, but I've since devoured all of my property.
When was he rich? Was that fief particularly profitable?
I think he's just talking about his sugar daddy, aka Claude Frollo. And he really likes the idea of joining in on the siege and the riot. Jehan proclaims he will dismantle the cloisters, burn the bishop in his palace. All this we will do in the time it takes for a burgomaster to eat a spoonful of soup. Our cause is just. We will plunder Notre-Dame, and that will be the end of it. We will hang Quasimodo.
I need a prequel about Quasimodo and Jehan's upbringing, because now I'm really curious about how much they interacted, if at all, and why Jehan seems to have such a grudge against him. At midnight on the dot, Clopin faces the army of vagabonds, and he ushers them out of the Court of Miracles and through the streets of Paris toward Notre Dame. A lot of events in this novel happen at 12, either AM or PM. We have Pierre Gringoi's play that happened at 12, or was supposed to happen at 12 noon. We had Esmeralda's execution that was supposed to happen at 12 noon. And now we have this siege of Notre Dame, which is supposed to happen at midnight, 12 a.m. Meanwhile, at Notre Dame, Esmeralda is sound asleep, but Quasimodo is wide awake. He is tense, he is making sure Esmeralda is safe. Ever since Quasimodo fought Claude Frollo off of Esmeralda at the end of Book 9, relationship between father and son has been tense, and Hugo makes a point to mention that Claude Frollo since has abused Quasimodo. He sometimes went so far as to strike him, but because Quasimodo is Quasimodo, and he would never, ever, ever in a million years raise a hand against Claude Frollo, his adoptive father, he has still remained faithful to Claude Frollo. He's just taking this abuse. But he's also remained faithful to Esmeralda, which, as we saw in Claude Frollo's evil scheme, is a problem for Claude Frollo.
After Quasimodo's doing his rounds and chores, he goes to the top of the northern tower to survey Paris. And he sees something odd. There's a massive crowd moving towards Notre Dame. And Quasimodo can't hear this, obviously, but in the darkness, Quasimodo sees something that, quote, seemed like an army of the dead, mute, impalpable, shrouded in fog. Again, this is not a horror novel, but that's a horrifying image. Quasimodo is terrified. He thinks that this army is on their way to hurt Esmeralda, because why else would there be a bunch of people gathered trying to get into the cathedral?
Maybe they really want to pray?
Well, think of Quasimodo's perspective. One, he's deaf, and two, last time there was a big crowd in front of Notre Dame, people tried to hang Esmeralda. He thinks about trying to let her escape, but there's really no way to do that. The streets are blocked and they're completely trapped. So Quasimodo decides the only way to take on this army that's building outside is to be a one-man army and defend Notre Dame himself.
So we have two misunderstandings coming into conflict here. On one hand, we have the army of vagabonds, which believes Parliament has ordered Esmeralda to be hanged. Of course, this is not true, but they didn't have phones or the internet or even newspapers back then. This is before the concept of journalism. So they have no way to clarify or confirm this information. And on the other hand, you have Quasimodo, who believes the army of vagabonds is here to hurt Esmeralda. None of that is true, but we're going to see these two misunderstandings clash.
This could never happen today. This would all be avoided by a simple Google search.
Down below, Clopin, the leader of the siege, is positioning his troops. So he has a plan of attack that's a little more elaborate than just run at the cathedral and have a grand old time. He is a man with a plan. And before he has the vagabonds do anything, he shouts up at the cathedral, demanding the Bishop of Paris to surrender Esmeralda under the threat of having his church invaded and plundered. If your church is sacred, our sister is sacred also. If our sister is not sacred, neither is your church. Not only does it call out the hypocrisy of the church for obeying this quote-unquote edict from Parliament, but it also represents how much the people of the Court of Miracles, Clopin specifically, care about Esmeralda. You know, her big dream is, I want to find my family. Well, it seems like she already has a family. It seems like Clopin and the other people in the Court of Miracles have taken on this surrogate sibling role for her and really care about her and look out for her, as evidenced by the fact that they're literally bearing sharpened weapons and about to go into battle for her. Now, the Bishop of Paris is not present, and Quasimodo is deaf, so he can't hear the speech. So inevitably nothing happens, and then Clopin orders the vagabonds to attack the cathedral, and the big battle scene at the climax of this novel commences.
Conveniently, there's been some restoration work being done on Notre Dame, so at the top of the cathedral there are plenty of stones and molten lead and giant wooden beams for Quasimodo to throw down on the vagabonds and crush them to death. And Hugo doesn't shy away from describing the toll that this is taking on the vagabonds. Quasimodo isn't just scaring people away, he's squishing them like bugs. But he doesn't care. He is willing to do anything to protect Esmeralda, even though this is all one horrible misunderstanding.
All of a sudden, the king's archers appear to beat the vagabonds back. So now we have 3 opposing forces clashing in this battle, and crossbows and muskets are firing, and now the residents of the neighboring houses are awake and they're horrified. It is pandemonium outside Notre Dame. Clopin, very resourcefully, orders the vagabonds to lift this massive beam Quasimodo threw down into the square, which almost certainly killed many people, and use it as a battering ram to get into the church. Hugo writes, every stroke of the ram reverberated in the caverns and in the innermost recesses of the church. So Quasimodo may not be able to hear the battering ram hitting the door, but he can feel it in his teeth.
It is a full-on siege. But the vagabonds are not just motivated by their love of Esmeralda, their sister. A lot of people are only there because they want to cause trouble, and more importantly, because they want to steal all of the treasures in Notre Dame. Silver crucifixes, chandeliers, gold chalices, diamonds. That's a real motivator. And while the battering ram is in use, Clopin and the Duke of Egypt are seemingly the ones who care the most about Esmeralda. But Matthias Hongadi is not being the most rational at the moment. He thinks that Notre Dame is an old enchanted church that has come to life, and that Quasimodo, who is the shadow that he sees from the distance between a huge bonfire he started between the towers of Notre Dame, is this thing called Sabnak, the demon of fortifications, who commands legions of stone armies. Now, this is not an actual Romani superstition, but it was a superstition that was mentioned in the book that Hugo used for his information on the Romani, as well as a lot of the other occult and creepy stuff in the book.
Speaking of Clopin, at some point he asks, hey, where is Pierre Gringoire? And someone says, oh yeah, he sneaked off before we even got to the cathedral. And Clopin is pissed. Understandably so. He says, the coward, to urge us into this affair and then leave us in the lurch. Girl, that's what I'm saying. I love Clopin. He keeps it real. Because Gringoire is a coward. He has no honor, no virtues. All he cares about is his own self-preservation. So, hey guys, we need to go save Esmeralda from Notre Dame. Let's go. Woo! Okay, yeah, siege. Da-da-da-da-da. Okay, bye.
Speaking of only caring about himself, Jehan returns. He briefly left the riot, not out of cowardice, but out of greed in his desire for treasure. He brings a ladder, which he brought from one of his old girlfriends, that he used to sneak into her house and avoid her dad, and he's going to use it to climb up to the upper gallery. He looks at the heap of bodies before him that Quasimodo has strewn and says, here is a heap of bodies worthy of the 5th book of the Iliad. I've read book 5 of the Iliad, and I can confirm there's a lot of bloodshed in there. A few other vagabonds climb up behind Jehan, and this is not as foolproof of a scheme as it seems, because the great athletic Quasimodo climbs down, he pushes the ladder, and then Jehan realizes, oh, snap, this is getting serious. So he tries to shoot Quasimodo with an arrow, while making a joke, of course. He misses Quasimodo's eyeball, which was his target, and hits him in the shoulder instead. Quasimodo, being the super strength Popeye guy that he is, takes the arrow, breaks it over his knee, and then tackles Jehan, flattening his armor. And he takes off each piece of this armor bit by bit, like a monkey taking off the shell of a nut. Jehan, instead of being terrified, is singing. He's having a good time singing drinking songs and laughing at Quasimodo until he's eventually thrown off of the side of the cathedral like a big sling being shot out. Jean's body slams against a piece of the architecture and his brains are dashed out in a particularly gross and gory death.
The vagabonds watch this murder in horror and rage. And motivated by Jean's death, they attack the cathedral with renewed force. Hugo writes, "You would have imagined that some other church had sent its gorgons, its demons, its dragons, its gargoyles, its most fantastic monsters to attack Notre Dame. And Quasimodo, terrified for Esmeralda's fate, prays for a miracle." Now, how is this battle going to end, you ask, listener? Well, you gotta wait for an answer, because we are cutting to the other side of Paris to find out what King Louis XI is up to. And listen, this chapter, chapter 5, gets a bad rap. People say it's really boring. It cuts away from the height of the action. It disrupts the momentum Hugo has been building all chapter. Those are relevant criticisms. I agree. But what you fail to understand is, this is the funniest chapter in the novel, and we're going to explain why. So we cut from the Battle of Notre Dame to the other side of Paris, in the Bastille, which is a political prison you might recall from your history classes, listener. The storming of this same Bastille was one of the turning points in the French Revolution, but of course that won't be for another 300 years. So what is King Louis XI doing in a political prison? Oh, going to bed. Yeah, King Louis XI is supposed to be sleeping in his palace, which is full of beautiful furniture and gilded ornaments and ostentatious displays of wealth as far as the eye can see. No, King Louis XI likens himself a humble, down-to-earth king who is in touch with the middle class. He doesn't like sleeping in his palace. It's too much for him. So he ordered an apartment to be built in the Bastille so that he can take naps and hang out with his friends.
See, I figure that's just to make him seem more heartless and cruel. Like, I'm so evil that I feel coziest in a creepy torture chamber.
I interpreted it as King Louis XI wanting to seem cool and down to earth. Regardless of what his motivations are, this is pretty ridiculous. This is like if New York Governor Kathy Hochul said, "Hey, I don't like the governor's mansion. It's too ostentatious for me. I'm gonna build an apartment in Alcatraz and sleep there instead." So King Louis XI is hanging out in his little apartment in the Bastille with 4 of his closest confidants, one of whom is making his triumphant return from book 1, my baby daddy, my toxic, lifelong situationship, Jacques Copenol, Hosier of Ghent. We are back. We are so back. It is unbelievable how back we are. We have achieved levels of back never dreamed possible. I need to calm down.
How could you calm down? Copenol is back. Pardon, not Copenol. Jacques Copenol, Hosier of Ghent, or J-Chog for short.
I know I don't need to say his whole name. I'm going to. It's funny. Listener, if you need any reason whatsoever to appreciate this chapter, there it is. J-Chog is back with a vengeance, baby.
But he's not loving this situation. I think he would prefer to be in the proper palace because there are no chairs in this apartment. Copenol and all of the other nobles have to stand around all night. How cheap is King Louis XI that he can't even get his friends something to sit down? Like, you don't have a single folding chair?
Yeah, wasn't there a joke a couple years ago? Imagine you go over to his house to Netflix and chill, and he doesn't even have a TV. This is, imagine you go over to his house to Netflix and chill, and he doesn't even have chairs.
Guys will live like this and not even see a problem with it.
Yeah, this is the medieval equivalent of not having a headboard. King Louis XI is really stressed on this particular night, not because of his lack of adequate furniture for his friends. No, they can stand all night for all he cares. He's stressed because he's reviewing his expenditures, and they have ballooned in size, so he has concluded that there need to be some cuts to the royal budget. And he says, all right, I need to cut down on the number of servants I have. I need to reduce my servant salaries. That's fine. That's an acceptable budget cut. Oh, but the lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, that I keep on hand for entertainment, no, those need to stay. And that's okay, because I am significantly more economical than previous kings when it comes to lion, tiger, and bear expenditures. So King Louis and his friends are hanging out, answering correspondence from other kings, as one does, and all of a sudden, a messenger runs into the apartment, and he's panting, and he yells, "The people of Paris have risen in revolt! The mob is in rebellion!" And the messenger communicates that this mob, which we know is the mob of vagabonds trying to get Esmeralda out of Notre Dame, this messenger says, oh, the mob is the middle-class people of Paris rebelling against the bailiff of the Palace of Justice. So now we have 3 opposing forces involved in this conflict, all of which believe a completely different story, none of which are true. Number 1, the vagabonds of the Court of Miracles, who believe Parliament has ordered Esmeralda to be hanged, which isn't true. 2 is Quasimodo, who believes the vagabonds intend to hurt Esmeralda, which isn't true. And 3 is the king and his poor friends who aren't allowed to sit down, who believe the people of Paris are rebelling against the bailiff of the Palace of Justice, which isn't true. It is a miscommunication festival, which I typically don't like in fiction. But here I think it works because it's being used as a vehicle to demonstrate the shortcomings of the Middle Ages and how easy it was to spread misinformation to an uneducated public, especially in a time before newspapers, the internet, television, etc. There is no Walter Cronkite in 1480s Paris who is going on the TV and saying, yeah, here's what happened today. Okay, cool, bye.
And then the messenger says that the king's troops have captured a few members of the mob and have brought them in for questioning. The 2 men come before the king. One of them is some random vagabond, Geoffrey Pensebourd. I'll call him Jeffy. So Jeffy is just this very dumb vagabond guy, or just your common robber. The king asked what he was going to do in the uprising, and he says, I don't know, the others went, so I went along. I know we are going to take something from somebody. And the king is not satisfied with this and orders Jeffy to be killed.
Which is the perfect example of somebody just being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
You can't say that about the other prisoner, Pierre Gringoire. He tries to distinguish himself from Jeffy, talking about how he's a philosopher and a poet, that he's falsely accused, and then he goes on this long, sycophantic rant about how pathetic he is and about how great the king is, and how he has nothing to do with this riot.
Yeah, sure he has nothing to do with this riot. He started it!
And the king listens to this rant, and also this glazing, and he says, you know what? I got this fancy new cage designed for putting prisoners in. It's too good for this loser. So just let him go. And the soldiers let Gringoire go scot-free.
So basically, the only reason Pierre Gringoire is still alive at this point is because the king thinks he is way too pathetic to spend time in the cage that he just dropped a band on. And the king is delighted that the people of Paris are allegedly rising in rebellion against the bailiff. Allegedly. And he looks out the window and watches everything go down. The horizon is on fire. And then he turns to his friend, Jacques Copenal, Hosier of Ghent, and says, Hey buddy, have you ever seen an insurrection? And Jacques Copenal, Hosier of Ghent replies, Oh yeah, I've started one, which is so fierce. Jacques Copenhagen of Ghent is the only person who could both raise an insurrection against the government and then become besties with the person at the head of government. This is great.
And then one of King Louis's other cronies, his beloved barber and confidant, Olivier Le Dame, tries to clear up the whole story. But unfortunately, his clarification is also full of misinformation. He says, "Oh, it is not against the bailiff of the palace that the insurrection of the populace is directed. It is against yourself, sire. The people have risen up to remove a witch from the Church of Notre-Dame." Frollo's lie reaches the closest confidant of the king. Everyone is believing it. So the king puts two and two together for this big game of telephone and says, "Oh, you are right. It is myself they are assailing. The witch is under the safeguard of the church, and the church is under my safeguard." And this is a stretch, but the king is so offended that even by a few degrees of separation, people are rebelling against his rule. He is ordering the archers to cut those scoundrels to bits, to break up the mob by force. And then, the topic of what everyone was actually talking about comes up again. Someone says, "Well, what about the witch?" And Louis XI is like, "Oh, what do the people want with her? I imagine they want to hang her. All right, exterminate the people and hang the witch."
So now everyone gets what they want, and no one gets what they want.
Just like King Solomon offering to cut that baby like a grilled cheese sandwich.
Do you think he intended to have it cut down the middle or diagonally?
The Lord works in mysterious ways. I always thought it was diagonal.
Our boy King Lou falls to his knees and starts praying. He says, "Ah, Notre Dame, Our Lady of Paris, please forgive my decision to violate your sanctity and violate your law of sanctuary. I promise I will never, ever, ever do it again. And in exchange, I'm going to get you a beautiful silver statue, the most beautiful silver statue in the world. There's never been a more beautiful silver statue than the one I am going to get you. I am so sorry. Please forgive me. And please help me get my frickin' budget under control."
And we finally get back to Quasimodo fighting off the vagabonds. All seems hopeless for him until he sees Phoebus leading the king's troops. And he thinks, "Oh, thank God, I've got backup." So the soldiers fight off the vagabonds, and it's a very violent scene. If Quasimodo's defense wasn't violent enough, here we have people being cut down. Phoebus conducted himself valiantly, Hugo writes, and gave up nothing. What escaped the point of the sword was cut down by its blade. Ugh.
How ironic, but maybe not ironic at all, that Phoebus is leading this counterattack against the vagabonds who are trying to, in their minds, save Esmeralda's life, when Phoebus and his rendezvous with Esmeralda is tangentially the reason why Esmeralda was sentenced to be executed in the first place. It all comes together like a beautiful tapestry.
And among the victims is Clopin, who is seen with a huge scythe mowing down the legs of the horses. Clopin is laid low by musket fire, by gunfire, a shot from an arquebus. I took Clopin using a scythe to be intentional. He has this symbol of the peasantry, of farming, of agriculture, that he's using to defend himself with, and yet he is laid down and killed by a symbol of modernity and industrialization, the gun. People are being killed left and right, and even the middle class is getting involved. The residents of the nearby houses are throwing open their windows and firing randomly into the crowd. So now we have four forces colliding in this conflict. Quasimodo, the king's troops, the vagabonds, and the middle-class homeowners trying to practice the castle doctrine. It is complete pandemonium, even as the pandemonium itself is settling down. The vagabonds retreat, those who aren't killed at least, and Quasimodo is ecstatic. He thinks Esmeralda is finally safe, so he runs up to her cell to tell her the good news. But it's empty.
Done, done. And I can't emphasize this enough. Done! What happened to Esmeralda? Well, book 11, the final book in this novel, yes, listener, we have arrived. Book 11 will answer that question. We begin from Esmeralda's point of view. She wakes up in the middle of the night, roused by a commotion outside her chamber. She sees this conflict happening in the square below. She has no idea what's going on. She does not recognize her friends. Terrified, she prays to the Christian God for the first time in her life. Again, Esmeralda is not a Christian. She expressed interest in becoming baptized and joining this faith in order to marry Phoebus, but that didn't work out. As of this moment, she is not a Christian, but she is praying to the Christian God and to Notre Dame herself for protection. And if Quasimodo is Notre Dame personified, then her prayers have been answered. Quasimodo is protecting her. Eventually, two men enter her cell. One is a man in a black cloak, referred to as the Man in Black. This is not country music star Johnny Cash. This is a different Man in Black, Claude Frollo. But Esmeralda doesn't recognize him, even though she's seen him, I think, 2 times now in this same exact black cloak. So maybe this is just a popular article of clothing in Paris. They were like the Uggs of their day. Everyone had one. You couldn't distinguish any individual person by them. The other person is her husband, Pierre Gringoire. Yeah, listener, just in case you forgot, Esmeralda is married. I'm sure she did. Esmeralda doesn't really care that Pierre Gringoire is there. Jacques is ecstatic to see Gringoire. She's rubbing up on him, she's nuzzling him, just being very, very affectionate. They got something going on that has nothing to do with Esmeralda. And Esmeralda says, "Hey, Mr. Esmeralda, who is this other guy?" And Gringoire says, "Oh, don't worry, it's one of my buddies. Anyway, the mob below wants to hang you. But while everyone is distracted, we're gonna smuggle you out of here. Don't worry, your life is in our hands." If my life was in Pierre Gringoire's hands, I would be horrified. And Esmeralda is. She's especially horrified of this mute cloaked figure. And she asks Gringoire, "Why isn't your friend talking?" And rather than outright say, "Oh, this is my old teacher and mentor," he's just really focused on the mission. Gringoire makes up a lie for no reason. He says, "Oh, this is my friend. His parents were really weird and made him a mute." Okay, I mean, this explanation has to be enough for Esmeralda, because even though she's not completely satisfied with that answer, it's either go with these men or possibly get hanged by this mob that's attacking the cathedral.
So our merry band of misfits descend the tower steps through the church courtyard out in the night. Eventually they come across a little boat docked on the bank of the Seine. They all get in, and the man in black starts rowing them down the river.
This is another really creepy scene.
Have you ever rowed a boat?
Yes, I have. It's really hard. It really burns your arms.
So Claude Frollo's gotta be pretty jacked if he's able to row himself, Esmeralda, Gringoire, and her goat.
Except Claude Frollo isn't jacked, because he doesn't leave the cathedral. The only thing he exercises is his mind. He's a pool noodle. So Claude Frollo is focused on rowing. Esmeralda is so horrified that she has become mute. Jacques obviously can't talk because she's an animal. Pierre Gringoire decides to provide the commentary for this little "it's a small world after all" boat excursion. He is running his mouth. I think he's so happy to be reunited with Jacques that he just keeps rambling and talking about nothing. And at one point, he obliviously looks to Claude Frollo and says, "Oh, by the way, Master, did you see that guy who was horribly murdered by Quasimodo? I wonder who that poor bastard was." And Claude Frollo stops rowing for a moment and just hangs his head in sorrow because he knows Gringoire is talking about his brother.
And Gringoire starts thinking, wait a minute, if this escape plan fails, I can't save my wife and her goat. So Gringoire keeps his priorities straight. Once the boat reaches the shore, he grabs Jolly and runs away, trusting that Claude Frollo is going to protect Esmeralda for him.
Very ironic.
So the man in black offers Esmeralda his arm. She rejects it and runs out of the boat. She doesn't know where she's going, only that she has to get away from this creepy ghost of Christmas yet to come guy. She does not trust him. Eventually, the man in black catches up with Esmeralda, grabs her, and drags her toward the Place de Grève, which is totally deserted. Hugo writes, at that moment, she had a vague feeling that fate was an irresistible power.
Throughout this deep dive into Hugo's novel, you and I have spoken pretty extensively about the role of fate, and how, in contrast to what the introduction would lead you to believe, this isn't really a novel about fate, even though all the characters and even the narrator seem to think it is. This is a novel about men who use fate as a way to shirk responsibility for the consequences of their own actions. But what about Esmeralda? What about her fate? She has no role in what has happened to her and what is presently happening to her. I mean, how do you explain an innocent teenage girl being sentenced to death for a crime she didn't commit other than fate? How do you explain wrong place, wrong time other than fate? Of course, Claude Frollo is the one forcing this fate onto her, but if we're talking about shirking responsibility for the consequences of your own actions and putting all of that onto fate, what is Esmeralda supposed to do? Is this really a novel about fate? Esmeralda's fate, which is inflicted on her by secular mortal forces? Does God even exist in the world of this novel?
God is one question. But as for fate, Esmeralda has the best case for being a victim of fate. But even so, she is a victim of fate, and fate only exists because the men around her, namely Claude Frollo, believe in it. And their actions are determined by their belief in fate, not the actual omnipotent existence of a force like fate. So it's only real because you believe in it. Sort of like Freddy Kruger.
I was going to say, Esmeralda is tried and sentenced to death for witchcraft, which exists in the world of the novel, not because it's real, but because the characters believe in it. And that's what makes it real. That's what makes its consequences real. Similarly, I think fate exists in the world of the novel, not because it's a legitimate force acting upon the characters, but because the characters believe in it, and that's what makes it real. That's what makes it have real consequences.
Frollo brings Esmeralda to the gallows. He pushes his hood back, revealing his identity, and he says these chilling lines to Esmeralda. We go no farther. Fate delivers us up into the hands of each other. Your life is at my disposal, my soul at yours. I can save you. Everything is prepared. All depends on your will. Whatever you want shall be done.
I want you to leave me alone!
Not an option. The only options Esmeralda has are when Frollo points to the gallows and says, choose between the two of us. Esmeralda examines her two options, and then Esmeralda says of the gallows, this horrifies me less than you. She would rather die than embrace Claude Frollo's love. And Frollo, pathetic as always, falls to his knees and professes his quote-unquote love for Esmeralda again. He tells her, this is an agony worthy of compassion. I assure you, I want to speak gently to you. I do not want you to be horrified of me. And, hey, get ready for this one. And then if a man loves a woman, it is not his fault.
Don't care.
Oh, you will have no compassion for me then? You will hate me forever?
Of course she will hate you forever. Look at what you've done to her. You led to her nearly being executed, and now you're telling her if she doesn't choose you, she will be executed anyway.
Even if it was a fair offer, and if it was honest, Frollo still really doesn't know anything about Esmeralda as a person. Everything he says about her and believes about her are based on his misconstrued, selfish conception of her. He tells her, "You are goodness, all gentleness, all compassion, all sweetness. Alas, to me alone, you are cruel."
Number one, this isn't true. Number two, Frollo, how do you know that? You have no idea what she's like. You haven't spent any time with her. You don't even let her talk.
I'm the only one you're mean to, Esmeralda.
And Claude Frollo is rambling and ranting, descending further and further into absolute madness, totally losing his grip on sanity. And suddenly, he says something that, frankly, made me cry the first time I read this passage. I didn't think I had any more compassion left for Claude Frollo, but he pulled it out of me. In the midst of this rant, he suddenly says, "Cain, what have you done with your brother?" And then he freezes. Of course, this is a reference to the story of the very first murder, as explained by the book of Genesis, in which a man named Cain murders his brother, Abel. And Frollo continues, "What have I done with him, Lord? I have taken him to me. I have fed him. I have brought him up. I have loved him. I have idolized him. And I have slain him." This is so important. Claude and Jehan may have ended on pretty distant terms, with Claude throwing money at Jehan and saying, "Hey, get out, I'm not giving you any money again." But Claude still loves his brother. You know, at the end of the day, despite their differences, that's still the infant he saved from the plague all those years ago. That's still the little child who, for a fleeting period of time, taught him what it was like to love another human being, to love something even more than intellect and knowledge. And Claude is so affected by that infant's death that for one passing moment, he finally takes accountability for his actions. I have slain him. My brother is dead because of me. Of course, this doesn't last. He continues rambling and eventually lands on, "Oh, my brother's dead because of Esmeralda. My brother's dead because of you. I hate you, blah, blah, blah." But for a moment, he finally takes accountability for the consequences of his actions. All because of his love for his baby brother.
This all falls apart very quickly. Claude touches his face and realizes that he's crying. He's feeling a human emotion.
But I thought he was a statue.
He's stunned by this too. And then he looks up at Esmeralda and sees that she's not comforting him or reacting to his tears in any sort of way. This really bothers Frollo. "And you have coldly watched me weep?" he says to her. "Is it then true that women are not moved by anything that happens to the man that they hate? If you were to see me die, you would laugh."
He knows nothing about her.
And the things he thinks he knows are all wrong, and they're based on preconceived notions that are also wrong.
And how is he supposed to disrupt those preconceived notions if he doesn't even let her talk? He has said to her multiple times throughout this novel, "Don't talk. Be silent. Don't say the name Phoebus." Ugh.
Frollo gives one last offer to Esmeralda. He gives her the choice of the tomb or my bed. And Esmeralda is not having it. She's not a weak victim, like so many people on the internet and in the world of literary criticism say she is. She says, "Let me go, or I will tear out your disgusting gray hair and throw it in your face. It is Phoebus who I love. It is Phoebus who is handsome." Claude Frollo can't take this. He says, die then. And he lets Esmeralda go. And for a moment, it's like, is Esmeralda being freed? Is Frollo showing a bit of pity for once? But no. He calls on none other than the sack woman to grab Esmeralda and hold her there while Frollo goes to fetch the sergeants to have her hanged.
Esmeralda realizes that Claude Frollo has dragged her right in front of the sack woman's cell, and the sack woman has her arm reached out between the bars and is pinning Esmeralda in place while Frollo runs off to get the sergeants. And that is the last time Claude Frollo and Esmeralda interact. Remember, the sack woman, aka Paquette Le Chantefleurie, we heard a little bit more about her backstory in Book 6. She hates the Romani. She is extremely prejudiced against them. She blames them for her baby's death. Again, we don't know for a fact that it was a Romani couple that really abducted and possibly killed her baby. We don't know, but she seems to believe it is. So it looks like Claude Frollo has conspired with the sack woman to help apprehend Esmeralda. And because Paquette is prejudiced against the Romani, she is happy to help. And this is a incredibly creepy scene. And having her wrist clasped by these bony fingers is even more horrifying to Esmeralda than anything she's faced up till this point. Hugo writes that Esmeralda felt the horror mounting to the roots of her hair, and that Esmeralda realized she was not dealing with a human being, and the sack woman is cackling maniacally, so excited to see Esmeralda hurt and hanged. And Esmeralda asks, why do you hate me? What have I ever done to you? And the sack woman starts telling Esmeralda about her baby, Agnes, who she lost. To prove she's not making the story up, the sack woman shows Esmeralda this little pink satin baby shoe that belonged to Agnes. And Esmeralda is shocked. She digs into the little sack that hangs around her neck constantly, that she even had with her during what was supposed to be her execution, and she pulls out, plot twist, the other pink satin baby shoe. So in a Cinderella-esque twist of fate, Esmeralda is the sack woman's daughter. And Pat, I wish you could have seen me while I was reading this book of the novel, because I fully set the book down, looked up, and in a completely empty room said out loud to nobody, wait, Esmeralda isn't ethnically Romani? Esmeralda's white?
She is, for all intents and purposes, a white French girl. However, she has spent her whole life among the Romani, so she is definitely culturally Romani, just not ethnically in the way that we would define race and culture these days.
Gotcha. And at this point, Victor Hugo had been writing day in and day out for months to meet his contractual obligations without getting fined by his publisher. So I think at this point he was getting lazy, because instead of describing this very emotional, beautiful reunion between a mother and her long-lost daughter, Victor Hugo simply writes, "Who could describe such a scene? You! You're the author! That's your job! Am I supposed to do it?"
Doesn't Dante do the same thing in the Divine Comedy? When he finally gets to paradise and meets God, he just says, man, who could describe this?
That's such a cop-out. The sack woman's reunion with her daughter endows her with such strength that she is able to smash the bars of her cell with a boulder that she had been using as a pillow. And I think this is another reference to the book of Genesis. There's something called the Stone of Jacob, which is a stone that Jacob, the brother of Esau, used as a pillow that night when he fell asleep in the desert and had a vision from God. So the quote-unquote pillow, the stone, was consecrated. That could mean nothing, that could just be a coincidence, but if it is a biblical allusion, I think it's a pretty clever one. The sack woman pulls Esmeralda into her cell, and the two of them embrace and just weep over each other.
This is not just a melodramatic plot twist. Hugo is writing from some experience here. Hugo and Adele lost a child. Their first child, Leopold, named after Hugo's father, died very, very young. So he knows all about grief and the loss of a child. And Hugo probably shares the sack woman's dream of being reunited with a long-lost infant. And for a moment, everything in the world is good and bright. There's finally a bit of light in this very dark climax. Esmeralda has achieved her I want. She has found her parent. The sack woman has got her I want. She has her daughter. And she's overcome racism.
Yay! Stop racism!
The sack woman is praising God and even tells Esmeralda, I have some property 15 miles away, a house and a field. We can run away there now. We can live out the rest of our lives together. This podcast has afforded me the opportunity to see some close details I never noticed. So the sack woman is living in this creepy cell in the middle of the city for a decade and a half, praying and living off of public charity and people giving her random pieces of bread and water while she prays and feels despair. So you're taking up all of these public resources when you had a perfectly nice home 15 miles away. You could have had some other sad recluse living there while being a sad recluse at home. Why are you taking up the public resources and living on the dole, Sister Gajul?
Well, at least she plans to leave now. And she is so happy. The sack woman says, "Surely nothing can kill me, since I have not died of joy." Cue the It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia theme music. The sergeants, Claude Frollo called, pull up to the cell. They want Esmeralda. They are going to hang her. Heaven help whoever gets in their way. The sack woman hides Esmeralda and lies through her teeth to the sergeants. She is a mother on a mission, and she is willing to move heaven and earth to take care of her long-lost baby. She says, "Oh, I let Esmeralda go. Oh, the bars of my cell are broken because a drunken cart driver rammed into them." And another archer says, "Oh yeah, that's true, I was there." Haha. And the sack woman almost gets away with it. But as the sergeants are leaving, Esmeralda hears Phoebus's voice, and she jumps to her feet and calls for him. Is this a stupid decision on Esmeralda's part? Yeah, absolutely. Is it completely unjustifiable? No, not in my opinion. Remember, listener, Esmeralda thinks Phoebus is in love with her. So, if she's running away from Paris with her mom and leaving him, she probably wants to let him know where he can find her, or even ask him to come with them. Again, she thinks Phoebus loves her. That's what he told her. She has no evidence to the contrary. That woman he was standing on the balcony with during her execution, oh, maybe that was his sister. I don't know. Also, Esmeralda is completely exhausted by this point. She's been tousled between the lowest points of fear and misery and the highest points of joy and ecstasy. She isn't thinking twice about her actions. She's not even thinking once. She can't think at all. Her brain is fried.
Now, Phoebus doesn't hear Esmeralda call out for her. He has left to rejoin his company. But the sergeants are still there. The sack woman leaps in front of Esmeralda, prepared to defend her with her life. She is a real mama bear. Hugo writes, "She did not know what she would do, but she would not let them take her daughter away from her." Then she gives the soldiers her sob story, being separated and then reunited with her daughter. And then she says, "We're about to leave the city. We're not going to bother anybody again. Just let us go." And the men are moved to tears, but you know what? The soldiers are not going to defy the king's will. They grab Esmeralda, who faints, as she is wont to do, and drag her to the gallows. The sack woman doesn't give up. She's trying to wrench Esmeralda out of their arms. She's fighting and trying to bite the soldiers. And as she's wrestling the soldiers trying to free Esmeralda, the executioner kicks her down the stairs of the pillory and she snaps her neck on impact.
Those of us who are fans of Disney's animated adaptation are very familiar with this form of murder because this is the same death as Quasimodo's mother in the Disney movie, which might be a coincidence, or the screenwriters of that movie might have borrowed elements of this scene.
Back to Notre Dame. Quasimodo is distraught after finding Esmeralda's cell vacant. He becomes hysterical and starts tearing out his hair.
He really likes doing that, doesn't he?
Despairing or pulling out his hair?
Both. They seem to be his favorite hobbies, now that he's not ringing the bells anymore.
Oh, he's gonna ring the bell soon, with his face. He spends hours combing the cathedral, and eventually the king's archers finally break into the church, and Quasimodo, ironically, thinks that they are here to help Esmeralda. And Quasimodo helps the soldiers look around, but they can't find her either. Quasimodo persists. Hugo writes, "A male beast who has lost his mate could not have been more distraught or desperate than poor Quasimodo." Eventually, Quasimodo returns to the cell and collapses in despair, kissing the spot where she slept, and he slowly realizes that there's only one person who could have taken her, and that's Claude Frollo.
By this point, it's morning. Hugo writes, "A few lingering stars were going out in different places, and there was still a very bright one in the east, in the lightest part of the sky. Quasimodo spots Claude Frollo standing on a higher story of the cathedral and goes to him. Claude Frollo doesn't hear Quasimodo approach. He's so engrossed in what is happening in the square below that he doesn't hear Quasimodo's footsteps, and Quasimodo follows his father's gaze, and the two men watch Esmeralda be hanged. And by this point, remember, listener, Esmeralda is unconscious, which is just a very, very small bit of mercy here. From her perspective, she died in her sleep. She has no memory of being led up to the gallows and having her neck broken by this noose. She is unconscious for all of this.
Well, Claude Frollo is utterly without mercy. As he watches Esmeralda's execution, Hugo writes, "A laugh, such as only one who has ceased to be human is capable of, burst across the livid face of the priest." So he is laughing as Esmeralda is being hung and killed. He has officially finished his transformation from a human being to a demon.
Ironically, this is what Claude Frollo just said Esmeralda would do when he died. He says, "Esmeralda, you will laugh when I die." How the tables have turned. Claude Frollo, ironically and hypocritically, is laughing when Esmeralda died.
Now, Quasimodo doesn't hear Claude Frollo laugh, but he sees it. And this puts an end to Quasimodo's turmoil over whether he loves Claude Frollo or Esmeralda more. Claude Frollo has destroyed Esmeralda and betrayed him. And Quasimodo takes his two huge hands and pushes Claude Frollo into the abyss. And as Frollo falls to his doom, he shouts, "Damnation!"
Yes, damnation. Patrick, why this word?
I think this is Hugo's less than subtle way of telling us what Claude Frollo's fate is. I think it's debatable of whether or not God is present in the universe of this book. The French literary critic and Hugo biographer, André Maurois, he wrote that Notre-Dame de Paris is not a particularly Catholic or even a Christian book. So this is a long debate. He wrote that in the 50s. I think this is a way of saying that Frollo is being damned. He is being sent to hell, and his soul is being condemned for his actions. And Claude Frollo doesn't just fall off of the building in one piece. He suffers. Frollo initially falls, but he catches himself on a projection of the architecture, and he's hanging off of the gutter while his fingers are bleeding. And again, he's, a 90-pound weakling, except when rowing boats. So he can't pull himself up to climb back onto the balcony of the cathedral, and the lead pipe of the gutter starts to give way. And Quasimodo is close enough to see what's going on and reach up and save Frollo, but he can't hear. And he's looking at Esmeralda in despair, just utterly sad and distraught. And Quasimodo cries, which he had only done one time before in his life when Esmeralda gave him water. A stream flowed in silence from that eye that till then had not shed a single tear.
And then comes the novel's shortest paragraph, which is only 2 words. Quasimodo wept. Is this another biblical allusion? You know, the shortest verse in the Christian Bible is Jesus wept. That's a Jeopardy answer for you folks. So I think this is probably a direct allusion to the Christian Bible. And yet another way Hugo is reinforcing Quasimodo is in the role of Jesus Christ here.
Eventually, Claude Frollo's weak grip fails him. He falls, head first by the way, but he's so light, and based on the angle of where he fell, he ends up landing not on the street, but on the roof of a nearby house, breaking most of the bones in his body, but it doesn't kill him. And then suffering a fate much in line with the likes of Wile E. Coyote, Claude Frollo slides down the roof and finally hits the pavement and dies.
And Quasimodo looks from Esmeralda's body to Claude Frollo's and says, "There is all I have ever loved." The penultimate chapter of the novel begins at the end of the same day. Quasimodo is missing from Notre Dame. The masses have no idea where he is. Immediately, rumors circulate regarding his disappearance because, of course, the Parisians have nothing better to do than spread rumors and witness executions. Hugo writes, "The general opinion was that the day had arrived when, according to agreement, Quasimodo, or the devil, was to carry away Claude Frollo, the sorcerer." Which is ironic, considering that Hugo has reinforced throughout this novel, Quasimodo is anything but devilish. He represents the will of God. He represents Jesus Christ. He represents the cathedral. Hugo continues, "It was presumed that he had smashed the body to get at the soul, he being Claude Frollo, just as monkeys crack the shell of a nut to get at the kernel. For this reason, the archdeacon was not buried in sacred ground."
For all of Claude Frollo's efforts to preserve his soul and maintain his standing as a holy man, holier than thou art, the church believes that he committed suicide. And up until fairly recently, the position of the Catholic Church was that suicide was a mortal sin. The argument was that people were denying God's gift of life by choosing to kill themselves. And I take this as yet another sign that Claude Frollo is damned. That because of his choices, even the way people perceive them, he will not be given forgiveness. Also, King Louis XI dies too. But he dies of natural causes in the year 1483. Also his barber dies, but we'll get to that.
This is like the "Where Are They Now" montage at the end of the movie. As for Pierre Gringoire, our favorite loser who ran away with Jacques, he actually ended up becoming a mildly successful writer because he decided to pivot away from morality plays nobody could comprehend the plot of, least of all me, listener. And he decided to start writing tragedies, which Hugo describes as the most vain pursuit of all. Pat, Hugo was a tragic playwright. Is this Hugo poking fun at himself? Is this Hugo reminding us that Pierre Gringoire is more or less his self-insert?
I think it is, but it's also Hugo affording himself the opportunity to make another pun, because he makes the claim that Gringoire has come to a tragic end by becoming a tragedian.
Ha ha. Then we move to the next slide in the "Where Are They Now" montage. Phoebus also came to a tragic end, Hugo writes. He got married. ha ha ha, I hate my wife. Number one, this type of I hate marriage, I hate my wife humor that we commonly associate with the baby boom generation, no, that long predates that generation. That is right here, right now. Two, this is a sentence that, Pat, as you described in episode 3 of this podcast, would only be written by a man who just found out his wife is cheating on him with his best friend. In my most humble of opinions.
Yeah. Who cares about all of that Esmeralda, Quasimodo, Phoebus stuff?
Not me.
We really gotta get back to Olivier le Dame, King Louis XI's barber.
Who?
He shows up for like 2 pages when we're at the Bastille. And Olivier le Dame was not just any barber. He was the best barber and personal confidant of the king. And when the king dies, as was the case in China when Chairman Mao died, and people realized they could go after all of his cronies who were causing chaos throughout the country, like the Gang of Four, the new king and new monarchy goes after Olivier le Dame. They're like, you're corrupt, and you're going to be executed. So Olivier le Dame gets killed shortly afterwards. But then, about 19 months after Olivier le Dame gets killed, people decide, hey, we went too far. We can't unkill King Louis XI's barber, but we can make sure he gets a proper burial, because the body of Olivier le Dame was placed in a place called Montfaucon, which is a very creepy Gothic vault and open graveyard where the bodies of condemned criminals were left to rot. So we got this cleanup crew heading over to Montfaucon to snatch up whatever remains of Olivier le Dame, and they see a couple things. Amidst the army of skeletons and hanged corpses, they see 2 skeletons that strike them as particularly notable. One is clearly the skeleton of a woman, and the other has a humped back and deformed features.
So, what happened to Quasimodo? Well, we can only conclude that he left the cathedral, went to find Esmeralda's body, and then died embracing her. So, technically, Quasimodo and Esmeralda did end up together, but tragically, only in death. Funny enough, Esmeralda's jewelry, which is the beaded necklace and the little sack that once contained her baby shoe that she used to be reunited with her mother, those things are still intact on her skeleton at this point. Hugo writes, "These things were of so little value that the hangman, no doubt, had not thought it worth his while to take them," which is chilling and just very sickening and depressing. These are Esmeralda's most treasured possessions that she didn't even take off when she was sentenced to be executed. They were the only little bit of color on her body that day. But the hangman looks at them and says, "Oh, what's this crap doing here? I'm not going to touch that."
And for whatever reason, these men try to separate the skeleton of Quasimodo from the skeleton of Esmeralda. But as soon as they try to, Quasimodo's skeleton turns to dust and blows away in the wind, much like a Nature Valley bar.
Well, much like Notre Dame, or at least what Hugo is afraid Notre Dame Cathedral will end up as. He is afraid Notre Dame will fall to dust. And if Quasimodo is the personification of the cathedral, this is Hugo representing to us, the reader, what he is scared will happen to Notre Dame.
The last word of this novel about a great stone monument is dust, or its French equivalent, puissance, something to that effect.
And on that very, very somber note, we have reached the end of Victor Hugo's Notre-Dame de Paris, aka The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Now, Pat, I would like to know, as is our tradition, not only your thoughts on these 2 books we covered today, but your overall thoughts on the whole novel. And I have a question I would like you to frame your thoughts through. One of this novel's most common criticisms, especially from its contemporary readership, is that it's just tragedy for tragedy's sake. What is the point of Victor Hugo killing off just about his entire cast? What is the point of Hugo not giving anyone a happy ending, save for the man who only cares about his own self-preservation? Do you think there is a point Victor Hugo is trying to make by getting us invested in these characters just to resign them to a fate of misery and untimely death? Or is this novel just tragedy porn, essentially?
I wouldn't say it's tragedy porn or exploitative or suffering for the sake of suffering. I think this story is a tragedy. It is a tragedy in the kind of traditional Aristotelian sense, where tragedy is someone starting off in one position, a high position, and ending up in a low position. This is obviously most apparent with Claude Frollo, who starts off as a respected, though not well-liked, religious figure, and ending up as a demon, right? And you say the same thing with Esmeralda, who starts off as a carefree dancer and ends up the pawn and the victim of men who abuse her. You can keep going on and on. Quasimodo, he is this, tortured figure who finds a bit of happiness in distant love and affection, but ultimately cannot reconcile the two things he loves. Being a tragedy in the traditional sense, and even in the more loose definition of tragedy, as pioneered by Shakespeare, that Shakespeare is a huge influence. You can't have a happy ending in a story like this. At least not one that's entirely happy. So I don't think it's excessive. I think the woe is necessary. We would only care that these characters had such a poor fate if we cared about them. And it's not just contemporary readers who are put off by the sort of doom and gloom of the ending. That was a big problem, mostly for English-speaking readers in the late 1800s. Robert Louis Stevenson, the guy that wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, really did not vibe with all the grim stuff. You read any biography of Victor Hugo from about 1880 to 1930, and most of the criticism of this novel is that, one, it's unrealistic, and two, it's too sad. And both of those factors are partly why I love the novel so much. I think it explores such extremes of contrast, right? Beauty and ugliness, sanctity and demonic possession, evil and good, free will and fate, kindness and selfishness. That's necessary, and I think it's mixed together in such a capital R romantic way that this is a story that sticks with you. I know it's a story that I'm going to continue to revisit and relive throughout the rest of my life. This is my favorite book that I've ever read. I'm not saying it's the greatest novel that's ever been written, but it is my favorite, and it certainly is one of the great works in any language. And it is Victor Hugo's greatest contribution to mankind and the world of letters.
The Les Miserables fans are going to have a problem with that statement.
Les Miserables drags, and it's very, very dated, right? Notre-Dame de Paris draws from popular fiction at the time, historical fiction, Walter Scott, even the Gothic novel. But Hugo does it his own way. Les Miserables has some moments where I'm like, okay, this is just a mid-1800s melodrama. Like the scene where Jean Valjean hides from the authorities by getting buried alive. What is this, a penny dreadful newspaper serial novel? That's not high literature. That's just goofy.
So in contrast, you think the scenes of Notre-Dame de Paris where a human man falls in love with a goat, you think that's high literature?
I think it's more in line with the tone and the vision of the novel. It's certainly more original, and a third of the length.
Well, Pat, this is my favorite book in all the world as well, and I have read it. William Goldman, Eat Your Heart Out, and I am so happy that I did. But I might be even happier to hear about your answers to our game we always play at the end of every episode. So, out of every one and everything we discussed in this episode, Pat, who would you like to 1. Meet at the inn, 2. Turn to dust with, and 3. Throw off of Notre Dame?
I'm getting some deep cuts here. As for who I'm taking to the inn, there's this one vagabond who's mentioned about 2 or 3 times in the novel, who is beautifully rendered Pierre the Slaughterer. He gets killed by Quasimodo during the siege of Notre Dame, and I like to think he was created for the sole purpose of having a character say, Pierre the Slaughterer is slaughtered. However, this is not a faithful translation of the original, but the original still has a joke. In the French, the character is not Pierre the Slaughterer. The character's name is Pierre l'Assommeur, which is something like Pierre the beater-up guy, or Pierre the guy who knocks people unconscious. Maybe I think a name you could have come up with is Pierre the Bludgeoner. So, in the French, it's not that Pierre the Slaughterer is slaughtered, it's Pierre the Bludgeoner has been bludgeoned. As for who I'm turning to dust with, we mentioned him briefly. Matthias Hungadi, the Duke of Egypt. When he's talking about Sabnak, the devil of fortifications, he's got my attention. Leslie, you know me. I love talking to crazy old people who yammer about nonsense. I could have some good conversations with Matthias Hungadi Spicali, the Duke of Egypt. And by conversations, I mean I would just listen to him talk while I eat some rice pudding.
That's probably what our younger listeners think about us, Patrick. We're 2 crazy old people who yammer about nonsense. And by nonsense, I mean Sabnak, the demon of fortifications.
As for who I'm throwing off of Notre Dame, I was gonna say Captain Phoebus, but you know what? Why bother? He already suffered his worst possible fate by getting married, at least according to the narration, so I'll let him enjoy that fate, and I don't need to throw anybody off of Notre Dame. There's enough bloodshed and suffering. I'll let the suffering be as it is. Now, where do you stand, Leslie?
I thought long and hard about who I'm going to take to the inn. Answer's pretty obvious. I am meeting Clopin at the inn for a wonderful date. Even though Victor Hugo has made a point to mention multiple times that Clopin is really ugly. In fact, he was almost crowned the Pope of Fools in Book 1, but Quasimodo beat him out, just marginally. I really admire Clopin. I admire his commitment to doing what is right and protecting his people, even if it means storming a cathedral, even if it means trying to hang a guy who just accidentally stumbled into his home. He doesn't care. He is going to take care of his brothers and sisters. And I admire that he gave his life to the cause of protecting Esmeralda, even if it was because of a giant misunderstanding. You can't win them all. I am going to turn to dust with this entire novel. It is easily one of my favorite books, if not my favorite book definitively. I would absolutely love to reread it because it is so rich with imagery and illusions and Victor Hugo's musings on the human condition and our capacity to both love and hate each other. I'm sure every time I read it throughout my life, I will have a totally different experience, and I will pick up on some new beautiful detail that makes me say, oh my gosh, how did I not notice that? I can't believe we didn't talk about that when we covered this book on the podcast. As for who I'm throwing off of Notre Dame, I thought about choosing Pierre Gringoire because he saved Jacques instead of Esmeralda, but then I realized even if Pierre Gringoire had stuck around and he had tried to save Esmeralda, what would he have done? We established in Book 2 that he is pretty physically weak, and he is not a smart person at all. I think he would have hindered Esmeralda's prospects more than helped them, so I'm pretty happy that he pieced out early. So instead, controversially, I'm going to throw Victor Hugo himself off of Notre Dame. Lovingly, of course, lovingly. Sort of a thank you for writing this beautiful novel, but screw you for giving Quasimodo and Esmeralda, these 2 characters I have grown so attached to these past few months, such horrible, tragic fates. I'm happy they ended up together in some form. I'm sad that form was in death. Patrick, we did it! We made it to the end of Victor Hugo's novel!
Yeah!
And listener, you might be wondering, what's next for the Hunchcast? We're done with the book. What are we going to do now? Well, the rest of this podcast's life will be dedicated to covering every adaptation of this novel ever made. Every movie, every stage musical, every opera, every ballet, every book, every disco album. Yes, there is a Hunchback of Notre Dame disco album, and we will cover it right here on the Hunchcast. Basically, if it is a Hunchback adaptation and it has been preserved in a format that allows anyone to see it or hear it, we will dedicate an episode to it. And listener, we really want to hear from you. What adaptations do you want us to cover in the immediate future? Reach out to us on Instagram or Tumblr at The Hunchcast, or send us an email to thehunchcast@gmail.com, and let us know, what's your favorite adaptation? What do you want to hear us talk about? We are standing by to give the people what they want.
And what they want is Hunch.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Hunchcast. Ring that notification bell to be automatically updated when new episodes are released. For free bonus content, and to share your thoughts with us, follow us on Instagram, Tumblr, and TikTok at The Hunchcast. The Hunchcast of Notre Dame is a production of 1482 Media. All rights reserved.